Welcome to This Explainer. Today we're diving into what is literally one of the wildest, most volatile business case studies in modern history. We're looking at a brand that had to perfectly navigate this intense tension between preserving its really deep historical heritage while at the same time embracing radical, market-shocking disruption. And that brand, of course, is Gucci. Throughout this explainer, we're going to look closely at the data, the historical timelines, and the academic research that reveal exactly how Gucci managed a forced resurrection. We'll see how they shifted from near-total collapse to a modern powerhouse driven by craft, culture, and artificial intelligence. Okay, picture this. It's the 1970s and 80s, and Gucci is in serious trouble. They suffered a near-fatal brand dilution. We're talking about a company that went from being the absolute pinnacle of perfect Italian craftsmanship, like the very definition of exclusivity, to plastering their famous logo on mass-market, cheap plastic lighters, pens, and ashtrays sold in discount stores. The brand equity didn't just take a dip, it completely vanished, all because the logo became utterly ubiquitous and frankly meaningless. So that brings us to the real puzzle here, right? How on earth did a diluted mass-market logo actually pull off this resurrection to become a luxury titan? This frames a fascinating paradox in the luxury business. Usually, when a business wants to grow, it scales up volume. But in luxury, scaling quickly often means sacrificing the exact scarcity that made you valuable in the first place. Today, we're cracking the code on how Gucci managed this forced resurrection through some very deliberate, high-stakes decisions. Here's our roadmap for this explainer. 1. The strategic collapse and turnaround. 2. Returning to artisan craftsmanship. 3. Championing gender fluidity. 4. Pioneering AI and technology. And 5. Key lessons for brands. All right, let's jump straight into part 1, the strategic collapse and turnaround. So back in the 70s, their strategy shifted toward aggressive licensing agreements. They basically handed off the rights to use the Gucci logo to third parties with almost zero oversight, just chasing those easy, short-term royalty checks. By the 1980s, the entire organization was paralyzed. You had weak governance and these vicious family disputes, which meant that while the brand was hemorrhaging value out in the real world, the leadership was busy fighting each other in court. It was a corporate soap opera that almost killed the company. It wasn't until the 1990s that external intervention finally forced a complete structural overhaul and a true creative rebirth. Now, their turnaround was completely radical. I mean, the old strategy was your standard business playbook: maximize volume, chase that easy licensing cash. But the new strategy, they implemented extreme control measures. They aggressively ended all those licensing deals. Actually, think about that for a second. They literally walked away from hundreds of millions of dollars in guaranteed revenue. That is a move that would give most modern boardrooms a panic attack. And even more counterintuitive, they essentially elevated the creative director to be the guardian of the entire brand vision, giving them a level of authority that often sat right above the traditional operational CEO. So why make such a dramatic structural move? Well, it all comes down to intangible value. You see, in the luxury market, your primary product isn't actually a leather bag. It's prestige, it's heritage, it's cultural resonance. Gucci's leadership realized that because their product was fundamentally an idea, they had to protect this intangible value with extreme, almost fanatical operational discipline. And that discipline started by looking backward to their very roots. Let's move right along to part 2, returning to artisan craftsmanship. To get that prestige back, Gucci had to go back to the factory floor and completely reestablish flawless Italian craftsmanship. And it's a super intense sensory process. It starts with the hand inspection of only the absolute finest leather hides, where artisans check for exact thickness and natural grain. Then comes precision cutting. Technology helps here, but human skill absolutely dictates the shape. Step 3 is the meticulous hand assembly and stitching. Literally no uneven stitch is allowed. Smooth edges are absolutely paramount for comfort and durability. Finally, the luxury hardware is attached, and the bag goes through rigorous final inspections to ensure it perfectly matches the original design vision. It's extreme scarcity engineered perfectly. Which brings us to part 3, championing gender fluidity. But here's the thing. Perfect stitching alone isn't going to give you modern cultural relevance. Academic research shows us exactly how Gucci made a very deliberate shift toward diversity, equity, and inclusion, specifically focusing on gender fluidity during the tenure of former creative director Alessandro Michele. Researchers tracked how Gucci actively chose to challenge traditional gender norms. And this wasn't just a design choice, it was a highly calculated business strategy to appeal directly to the values of Gen Z and younger demographics. The research breaks down some really specific business tactics they used to pull this off. For instance, they combined menswear and womenswear runway shows, which completely shattered traditional industry divisions. They launched the Gucci MX collection, specifically designed from the ground up as gender-neutral and non-binary fashion. They also collaborated heavily with non-binary and gender-fluid spokespeople. And they backed all of this up with massive corporate social responsibility campaigns, expanding initiatives like Chime for Change to explore what gender actually means to Gen Z globally. Now, launching these gender-fluid collections, that was a highly conscious choice to polarize the market. By embracing this bold, somewhat unconventional aesthetic, they absolutely knew, they were going to alienate traditional buyers who just wanted quiet, classic luxury. But accepting that exclusion, that was their masterstroke. Because think about it, in a crowded market, playing it safe is basically a guarantee that you'll be invisible. By purposefully polarizing, they built a highly recognizable, fiercely engaged modern identity that their competitors were quite literally forced to react to. Let's pivot over to part 4, pioneering AI and technology. When you compare legacy luxury operations with Gucci's massive integration of big data, the shift is honestly staggering. Take design, for example. Instead of wasting time and material on endless physical samples, designers are now using generative AI to rapidly prototype virtual variations based on past collections and future trends. Over in the supply chain, they've completely moved from reactive inventory to predictive demand analytics, meaning they produce exactly what is needed, which drastically reduces waste. And in retail, standard displays are being replaced by immersive, smart projections that literally respond to customer movement. It really proves that in modern luxury, data is now outperforming pure intuition. And they're pushing boundaries everywhere. They've rolled out these AR virtual try-ons for sneakers, which is a massive draw for digital-first Gen Z buyers. They're also combating the exact counterfeiting that nearly ruined them in the 80s, but this time they're using computer vision, AI, and blockchain digital passports to verify authenticity, a brilliant technological fix for a historical vulnerability. On top of that, they're using AI systems to analyze browsing behavior to offer hyper-personalized virtual stylists, and even using AI to innovate biofabricated sustainable materials. They aren't using technology to replace luxury, they're using it to scale personalized exclusivity. All right, let's bring it all home with part 5, key lessons for brands. So, pulling all these threads together, the ultimate insights are crystal clear. First off, strategic restraint is absolutely essential. To maintain intangible value, you have to be willing to say no to short-term volume and easy cash. Second, hyper-personalization, driven by big data, is the true engine of loyalty in the modern market. Third, if you're in the business of selling an idea, you must elevate your creative leadership to protect that brand equity above literally everything else. And finally, bold differentiation, even when it polarizes, will always beat safe neutrality. Brand value isn't permanent. It requires constant renewal through discipline, creativity, and data. Gucci's entire playbook involved deliberately embracing volatility and actually accepting exclusion as a way to manage risk. So here's a thought to leave you with. If a nearly century-old luxury brand could succeed so wildly by purposefully alienating the middle and choosing bold differentiation, what other seemingly conservative industries out there might benefit from taking a similarly bold, polarizing risk? It's definitely something to chew on as you apply these lessons to your own strategic understanding. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep learning.